Hello, hello. Welcome to Coder Radio. It's been a couple weeks, and so as promised, I'm starting the series. It's going to be, I think, about every 2 weeks. So the other show, right, the opposite week would be like a regular interview. The AI coding tools. Originally was supposed to be one big show. And boy, was that a mistake. I've had to throw out quite a bit of content because these tools are moving too fast. I'll give you an example. I started with Warp originally, and they did a massive update, which basically obsoleted the entire show I did on it. So I'm not releasing that. I'm going to re-record something new, whole totally different take. We are going to go through a bunch of these tools, starting today with a quick look at GitHub Copilot as it stands tightly integrated into the GitHub/Microsoft ecosystem. By that, I mean VS Code and, of course, the GitHub, right? It's got GitHub in the name. Should have been pretty obvious. Following that, we're going to take a look at Claude Code. We're going to take a look at Cursor. These are not necessarily in order, by the way. We're going to take a look at Warp, of course. We're going to take a look at maybe Kiro. I just started testing Kiro out about a month ago, and it's very new. So I might put that one at the very end just to give them time to kind of differentiate a little bit. We're going to look at some of the open source alternatives, right, that you can run locally. Because most everything I just mentioned is either cloud or cloud plus MCP based. So I know a lot of you, rightly care about, can I run this open source? Can I run this on my machine or behind the firewall at my enterprise? So we'll look at a few of those. I think that's going to be interesting because those are projects that don't get a ton of attention, but probably should. So my hope is that we can maybe, if not, I don't know where I am actually landing on this for my day-to-day, how, in particular, how much and how I'm going to use these tools. But certainly, if history is any indicator, right, we're kind of back in the old web server wars, that the open source solution, i.e. Apache, going way back then, I wouldn't count them out. I'll put it that way. We're also going to look at how some of these tools may or may not have IP or privacy or security implications. That's the thing, right? So the way I'm going to structure this is I'm going to do one tool on each show. Some of them are pretty big, so maybe one aspect of one tool. Like Copilot, I have a feeling is going to get 2 shows. Just separated out by time, because I know, pretty boring if you have 2 shows in a row that are like something you don't care about. And with that, let me do a little bit of housekeeping, then I'll dive right in. So that jobs channel on the Discord, join the Discord. People are using it. A lot of jobs have been posted. Some really cool ones from some really cool places that I think you guys like, including System 76, Fly.io. Nobody's paying me for this, by the way. These are just, I see the jobs. Other community members see the jobs. We just throw them in the channel. Super simple, pretty straightforward, right? If you're qualified, if you want it, apply there. Folks in the Discord who are hiring managers have actually been posting jobs at their shops, believe it or not. So their employers, which is great, right? Because if you the way I look at things is, someone who is engaged enough to listen to a show like Coder Radio and then join the Discord and then chat with me in the Discord is somebody I would give a leg up in the hiring process, right? They're passionate, they're interested. Excuse me, I'm opening a cough drop because I can't go a month without getting a cold now. So that's just something to keep in mind about. That Discord is popping. We have a lot of conversations, a lot of people at different levels. If you are in particular interested in setting up like weird Linux home servers, I kind of didn't pay attention, but a lot of people are doing some kind of like home automation or whatever with that. So there's some gurus there. Gaming. There was a lot of people talking about gaming. I am well behind the curve there. I just started playing Mass Effect. That's Mass Effect 1. Yes, I'm aware that I'm a decade plus off in terms of timing, but I'm playing it on my Framework 13 in Proton, and it runs great. I mean, the game's really good, which I guess this is why people always liked it, right? And won a bunch of awards. 2, oh my God, we should do a whole show on this. But gaming on Linux is really, really good now. And it's kind of I remember back in my day, a lot of the reason developers moved over to Mac OS, or as we called it back then, because we were cool, right? Ready? OS X, which was the wrong name. It was OS 10. Gather around, children. Let me tell you about Snow Leopard. Was because it was a quote-unquote nice GUI, which it was. I actually really like Mac still. And a Unix underpinning, right? It's BSD under the hood. Well, good old desktop Linux, especially with things like Omacub, which is what I'm using, and Omarchy. That's the DHH thing. They're both DHH things. Omacub is based on Ubuntu. Omarchy is based on Arch. That kind of streamline the setup process, smooth out some design stuff. I particularly like what he did with the fonts so that your font rendering looks good. It's one of those things that if you don't have like a high-res monitor and are in Snob coming from Mac, you may or may not notice. But I notice and I care. So, I mean, it really is just an out-of-the-box solution that just works, quote unquote, to quote another Apple user snobby thing. And I get the advantage of being able to play. I mean, I'll put it to you this way. I have a pretty large Steam library of older games. Granted, I do tend to play, I guess Mass Effect is a little bit of a outlier here. But I tend to play like strategy games. And so far, everything works on the framework. When I say works, I don't mean works where I, sacrifice a chicken, light a candle to St. Anthony, and do a little dance. I mean, it just works. Download whatever. It does it for you, right? I'm sure most of you know what I'm talking about. But for those who don't, if you're in Steam on Linux, you just enable Proton, and I think it's by default in the aggressive setting. And it just will say, oh, this game. Well, we have a whole database of games that we know how to do the wine tricks under the hood and all that. And it just does it. Other alternatives to Proton, see, I'm accidentally doing this, but one more thing and then we'll move into the meat of the show, is Lutris. Although I have to be honest, I haven't even installed Lutris on this machine because Proton's doing it for me. And it just so happens that all my content, or all my game content, I should say, that I want to play is in Steam, including Magic Arena now, which the Spider-Man set is coming out. So I'm sure I will be shamefully buying some gems because I'm a Candy Crush mom. I just, microtransactions are killing me. But what's not killing me is GitHub Copilot, although sometimes it does. So let's high level. What is Copilot? It is another lesson in Microsoft having a problem overloading terms, because there is a Copilot for virtually everything that Microsoft sells you. And when I say virtually everything, I'm including Windows, Office. It's in Power BI in some cases. I think there's one for Azure, depending on what you're doing. And the Windows one is the weirdest, but we're going to just, for this conversation, when I say Copilot, I mean GitHub Copilot in VS Code and on github.com or at your enterprise GitHub, right? We're not going to, just not touching the Windows one with a 70-foot pole, because one, I don't really use Windows that much. And two, it's kind of not the same thing, in my opinion. I know there's a long, technical, frankly boring argument that people can have on Reddit if they really want to about, is it the same underlying thing? And at some level, I guess it is, because, well, let's just talk about the structure of Copilot. What the hell is Copilot, right? It is a piece of software that under the hood is running an LLM. Okay. Most of the time, that LLM is some version of ChatGPT. I've got my Visual Studio Code open right now, and mine is running GPT-5, right? ChatGPT-5. Okay. Makes sense, because that's kind of the standardized ChatGPT right now. It can also, under the hood, optionally run things like Gemini, Claude, which probably should. A bunch of others. You can, in some cases, bring your own, or you can add your own API key, which has advantages and disadvantages. But what is it doing for you, right? Let's just assume you're on the normal non-enterprisey path right now. Well, it's living in VS Code. It's got I don't know how to call it. It's like a chat window, almost as if you were dealing with a crappy customer service bot on somebody's website. And you can directly ask it questions, right? You can say, build me a login page, and it'll look at your project and say, oh, this is a Python Flask project. Let me go ahead and scaffold that up. Oh, I see you have a user's model here, blah, 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 blah. And it's generally pretty good at simple stuff like that. I think is more interesting is the inline Copilot, where I found this super helpful. Let's say you're inheriting a project from somebody and they're using some whacked out library that you've never used before. You can go ahead, highlight, I'm just going to spitball here, right? Let's just say like the method is, summon scorpions. Well, what the hell does summon scorpions do? Bad example, because it probably summons scorpions, but let's just go with it. Highlight it, and it will go dig into the library and give you kind of like a context window if you're in VS Code of what it does. And then tell it to me, like you can ask it for like a tell it to me like I'm 5 explanation. Super helpful, especially if you're like me and you work with a lot of enterprise software where there either is no documentation, which is the norm, Documentation that time has forgotten, meaning that, there is documentation, but the documentation wasn't properly maintained and is therefore no longer accurate to what the code actually does. Or, my personal favorite, there is some weird internal library that somebody who is a graybeard over there wrote. That graybeard has since retired, and their entire system runs on this weird-ass internal library that you have no idea how it works, but it's there, and ripping it out would be crippling. This may be what happened to me a couple months ago. But luckily, Copilot was like, this is what I think this is doing. This is how it's structured. Very nice. Love that. I know it sounds boring. My other kind of obnoxious use case for it, write me some documentation. So there's really no excuse with these tools, but Copilot in particular, to not write documentation anymore because you don't have to write it. You just have to check it to make sure it's not, hallucinating or crazy. And usually it's not, right? Because you could say, this is my summon scorpions module. I don't know why I'm going with a South Park Warcraft meme here, but I am. And we need some documentation on that because it is super important for our business rules that scorpions be available for the customer on demand. So we need to know for future developers, what does the summon scorpions method expect? What is a valid parameter for a scorpion, right? We need all these things, but we're a little lazy. We don't want to write documentation. So go Copilot. Another great use case, just sticking again with the in Visual Studio Code, in kind of the agent mode. That's a good point. There's ask an agent mode. Ask mode is exactly what it sounds like. You ask it a question, or if you're from New Jersey, you can ask it a question, but one of those is murder. And it just tells you the answer. Or it tells you what it thinks the answer is. And again, a big flaw we're going to see over and over again in a lot of these tools, so it's not just me picking on Copilot, is that if the session runs long enough, this has been my experience at least. This has been my experience with all of these in editor tools. It starts to go nuts. It starts doing crazy things. And then the kiss of death is when it replies something like, and I don't have it in front of me, but so it's not going to be verbatim, but you'll get the spirit of it. Oh, I see what I did wrong. Let me fix that. If it does that more than twice on a specific problem, you might want to close that session and restart, because they do start hallucinating. There is the concept of a context window, which a context window is basically how long, right? How many lines in the conversation can it go back? Can it remember? There's some limits on that. There's also the risk of confusion. If you have one Copilot session open and you're, let's say, in agent mode and you're doing multiple things that are unrelated, it'll keep the context window open as long as it can, right? Following its own rules. But it may start to get confused. Let me give you an example. If you're doing, let's say you're doing like UI stuff, right? You're making a bunch of React components, right? I would probably keep one Copilot window open or do them all at once in one context session. This is just a tip that has been helpful for me, to keep it thinking, okay, I'm working on React components. And maybe you have some rules for React components, right? They have to be mobile responsive. Do we say that anymore? Is that just me being old? Do we say mobile responsive? I don't know. They can't use external dependencies other than React and whatever I already have, which is an important thing to tell it because it likes to pull in dependencies. Match my code style, right? I don't know. Maybe you love snake case, or maybe you don't, right? Maybe you love camel case. Who knows? That is a good kind of self-contained area to keep into one context window. Alternatively, you might have something like database migrations, same idea. The problem is if you mix your database migrations and your React code in one session, in one context window, eventually what's going to happen is it's going to start getting confused for a couple of reasons. One, context windows are not infinite. They are limited. So you're better off just keeping one window per type of task such that you can maximize the, frankly, usefulness of that window, rather than having it, this is going to sound idiotic, but switch context within a given context window. Meaning, just because you have two different ideas doesn't mean it's going to know that and automatically give you a new context window. In fact, it's not, as of today, which is like the 20th of September. It's going to, it's just going to, it's a dumb system in terms of how they work. It's just literally length of the conversation. Some tools are a little better at this. Warp does a better job at this. If you ask something like wildly different from what you've been doing, it'll pop up a thing that says, do you want to start a new conversation? What it's really asking you is, do you want me to start a new context window? Because it knows that it's not the same thing. It's not perfect. I have yet to see Copilot do that. I think Copilot should do that. I also, this is maybe one of my critiques of it. It makes lots of promises when it's sitting there in your Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code session. And it doesn't warn you. It does tell you it can make mistakes, but it doesn't. Like, I would be curious to know how many of you listening knew about the concept of context windows and how they work, right? And then I just gave you the, preschool explanation of how they work. Explained it to you like you're 5. So there's a lot more nuance there, but whatever, we don't care. So now let's just jump out of the editor real quick. It also has like a super IntelliSense feature, which is exactly what it sounds like, right? So it's like, if it thinks you're, I don't know, let's do another stupid examples. We want to loop through the scorpions we've summoned, and we start writing like a while loop or a for loop. It knows you're in like, overloading more context. I'm turning into Microsoft. I'm using words for multiple things. You're in the context of like the attack with scorpions function or something. It'll just like write you a loop. Let's loop through all the scorpions, whatever. Let's jump out of the editor and let's go to github.com. Well, this is where I think Copilot kind of separates itself from the pack a little bit. Also, I would refer you to my conversation about 2 months ago with Tim Rogers of Microsoft, product manager over there on some Copilot AI stuff. Very cool. Just kind of a good chat. He actually hinted at some of the stuff they were releasing, it's interesting to go back and listen to it and then look at like some of the more recent announcements and say, I did not figure that out. I really didn't. He really had me baffled. I was like Scotland Yard. I had to have Sherlock Holmes come tell me. So you go to github.com, and this is where things get a little messy, but also I think really, really good. First off, it is very aware of all the features of GitHub. It's aware of actions, meaning it can help you with your actions. You can tell it to, if you want to get really fancy, you can start using MCPs and tell it to do things based on your actions. It is hyper aware of pull requests and some of the features that GitHub, specifically bolted on pull requests. It does some nice stuff with that too. It does work in the GitHub in browser editor. I don't know who's using that editor. Maybe if you're editing like a YAML file for an action or something, you might be. But if that is something you're into, then certainly Copilot's got your back. It's also if you're an organization or an enterprise, and this is where I think they really hit the sweet spot. One, it will promise, you can tell it to, right, to not like scan your repos for its own just general use, but it will scan your repos for your enterprise use. You can set up enterprise rules. You can set, which is like, we don't, I don't know, right? So I got to make something up. We don't use PHP because my case PHP. That's not actually a rule you could set. Oh, here's one. Here's an easy one. Ruby. Prefer frozen strings when possible, right? So frozen string is like an immutable string, basically. Great. Dumb rule. It's not the most complicated thing in the world. There are reasons you would do it, mostly performance. And I actually think new versions of Ruby do that by default, but it doesn't really matter. You could have rules for style, right? I love snakecase.com could be your rule. So snakecase all the way. And you can also tell it, which I think is really interesting, that this is our master style guide, right? So, the Madbotter Inc. could have our style guide, which we don't on GitHub, but we should maybe. I don't know. We just like have an old one in Drive. And, try to adhere to the style guide. Try being the operative word there. It is also context aware of your repos. So you can do things like tell it to refer to one of your repos, which is super nice and super helpful. I can give you a real world example, right? Alice is actually like several repos. There is a Alice core repo that has a bunch of like the core libraries and a lot of the data transformation, data parsing stuff. Well, refer to that for what the core structures are going to look like if we're writing another extension or like a custom. I don't know, we do a lot of like integrating like a part of Alice into somebody's enterprise thing because, they need to get their Fox Pro data or their Access data into, let's say, Snowflake or Power BI or something like that, which is a thing we do. But you don't need the entire instance. You might only need part of it. So it's super helpful. It is a separate charge. It's not very pricey, although this is one of those things that... So when I started using Copilot, it was very cheap. The prices have gone up. I have a feeling that we are, anybody who's been around a while knows that there's this cycle, right? Right now we're in the grab market share, kill competitors cycle or phase of the cycle. I would not be surprised if in particular on the organization enterprise side, by the way, those of you not using GitHub in this way, organization enterprise are just tiers of billing. Like there's different roles, but you don't care. It's just tiers of billing, slightly different features. Like the enterprise stuff, you get the 2FA. We have an enterprise account just for security and confidentiality reasons to keep things locked down. So it seems like that's where they're going to start charging more. I don't know. I one of the threads through this entire series is going to be these prices. These tools are very, very, very affordable for what they do now. And I have a feeling they're all going to cost more money. And that's just the way it goes. So bottom line, should you be using Copilot? Well, that's up to you. I think it's silly to completely dismiss the technology out of hand. I know, just from being in the chat, that there is a small but pretty passionate group of you who feel all this LLM stuff's just going to like generate garbage code and go away. I think there's some truth to that, right? I don't think it's going to go away, but certainly the dream of 100% vibe coding, I hate that term, your way to victory is not true. I also think there are some, let's just say I get lots of dev shops that pitch me, like offshore shops to try to be subcontractors or whatever. And there's been a change in the pitch that I'm getting from some of the more savvy ones, where they're just saying we vibe code everything so it's cheaper. That may or may not be accurate. I would mention things like technical debt and institutional knowledge and just knowing what the hell your thing is doing. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't use the tool at all. I think it's in particular for the use cases I mentioned. Oh, another big one, writing tests, right? You can just point it to like a Rails controller and say, write me tests for this. The test won't be perfect. You'll have to go in, make them a little more intelligent, but they're pretty damn good, right? And frankly, it's better than nothing. Then you can also use it on GitHub and say, write me an action that runs these tests. See? You would also do that from VS Code. There you go. Comes full circle. Should you pay for Copilot if you're an individual developer? Well, this is where I'm kind of mixed. I think it's worth the try. I think you should do one of the low plans, but you have to make sure you're getting the ROI, right? And if you're like a student, I kind of don't think you should use this at all, except maybe to like answer questions. Just like, hey, how does this work? But then you could just go to, one of the browser-based ChatGPTs or Claude. Because there is, I'll give the negative Nancy's this. There is definitely a risk that, and this isn't Copilot specific, but that any and all of these tools are going to be used as crutches for, let's say, developers in school or junior developers to try to just kind of like overly fake it, right? I mean, this sounds so old school now, but like did you just copy pasta this off of Stack Overflow? Well, this is that on steroids. We are seeing, I don't know how much of this we can say. I'm going to be careful how I phrase this because it's kind of doom and glooming. It definitely obfuscates, or can I put this nicely? It obviates is the right word. Obviates the need and the usefulness of super junior devs, I feel. So one of the things we used to do at Team B with junior devs that was pretty important is have them write tests. And that role no longer exists because we can do it with this. It's tough because it is true, and you can go on Reddit or other places or even our Discord, that junior folks are having a very hard time right now getting work, right? Getting jobs as developers. There's a lot going on in the world, right? Can you lay it at the LLM coding tools fee? I don't know. Certainly, I do see a lot of organizations. I'll give you an example. My inbox is full of like startups and dev shops, just organizations that want to come on and have somebody interviewed to talk about how they're, streamlining everything with AI, and they've, eliminated X positions or whatever. And it's most of those positions are generally, if it's a dev shop, the junior people. There is the other path where people are trying to just make juniors punch well above their weight with this stuff, which I guess you can get away with sometimes. I think you're going to run into trouble there, but it can be a dirty business being a dev shop. And we all know, I'm not going to name names, but we all know there are large recruiting firms that double as dev shops that, let's just say, have you been doing something for 6 months? Well, you're senior now, right? Because they have a different billing rate for senior and junior. I kind of hate the question, but I know it's going to come up of, well, what do you do as someone breaking in as a junior developer given these tools? And I feel like the answer is both. It's not to completely ignore them and not use them at all, but you need to definitely get some grounding. I'd probably try to niche down. I mean, I think that's good advice anyway, especially starting out, but become the, I don't know, right? Fast API expert, right? Become the Swift, Swift UI expert, whatever thing you think makes sense in your market, particularly if you're looking for a JOB job, your local market has a lot of demand for, right? Different cities, different regions are different than others. For instance, down here in Tampa, there is not a lot of Ruby and Rails, but there is quite a bit of Python. A lot of that's the cybersecurity stuff, right? I'm sure you've been around long enough, you know how it is. You get, your region change. Like we have MacDill, the joint base. So it is a very good business to be a cybersecurity shop, and a lot of them are either Microsoft based. We also have a Microsoft campus, which they certainly, have an influence on what gets done here. Your region may be different, right? I know Boston has tons of Rails, tons of Ruby going on, partially because that's where Thoughtbot started, right? And Dockyard, I don't know if they're still up there. I think they went full distributed, but they were. And these are like two fairly well-known at the time Rails shops. And I don't know if Dockyard still does Rails, but so you're going to have to make some choices, right? You're going to have to, if you're a junior developer, I would say take a look at these tools, use them as learning tools, very possible, especially with that ask mode, super helpful. But figure out what you're going to do, figure out something practical to get a job, join the Discord. There's a lot of more senior people who know about jobs. And I'll give you a little hint, jobs that it's not super hard to hire right now. And I don't think people are really paying to advertise their jobs because you could just find somebody. I know we've had a couple people get hired just by basically, oh yeah, we didn't publish this yet, but here's the, like the weird obscure page, but we're not like advertising it on Indeed or I forgot the name. It's the one that every podcast has a commercial for, but this one, and I've actually been their customer, ZipRecruiter, right? So give it a go. I say try out the tools. If you're senior, Copilot's, all these tools basically, but Copilot in particular is basically like a junior dev in your pocket. So that's really nice, right? That's great. Go write this documentation. Go, write the test for me. Will they get better? Probably, right? I think at the end of this whole series, we're going to have an outlook thing on, where are we going? I kind of think Copilot's here to stay because it's Microsoft. And I'm acting like this is a hot take, but it's really not because Microsoft has unlimited money. So they're just insulated in a very serious way from negative externalities of economics. Yeah. So next time, I think we're going to do Cursor. And that will be a few weeks, though. So we have another interview that just went to editing that should come out not this week or not next week, but the week after. This comes out next week. Oh, it's out when it's out. Who knows? If you are interested in sponsoring on the show, we have a slot available. Reach out. We're going to do another mailbag at the end of next month, October. Let's see, this whole thing with delayed releases is like very confusing. So go ahead in that feedback channel in the Discord. If you have something, if it's something you want to keep anonymous, just send it to me. There's a form on the show page, or you can just, I'm all over, right? DM it to me. You have to tell me you want to be anonymous. I can't stress this enough. I don't just intuit it because what happens is all the feedback goes into one big document for me. So I don't actually know, unless there's a note made for it, I don't really know where it came from by the time I actually go through it, right? So it's like, you could write me something tomorrow. It goes in the document. I don't really look at it until I do the show. All right, well, it's been great. Check out Copilot. Check out the old episode with Tim Rogers. And have a great day. Happy coding.